So the case of Frank Stronach and the potential of civil lawsuits for sexual assault raises another issue, and that is Magna, as the employer, responsible for potential claims? Now, you might say, well, who really cares? Because likely Frank's got the cash to pay a civil judgment if he's sued personally. And what does it add to the mix to sue Magna as well, or just Magna? Well, I think the short answer is it matters a lot. Maybe Frank has the cash, maybe he doesn't. Frank used a trust agreement to hold his interest in Magna as a shareholder. So maybe he's transferred previously his assets to the trust. Maybe he doesn't have much money in his own name. We don't know that. That's an issue. The other question is that if there's a claim for punitive damages, that is damages to punish someone for high-handed, malicious conduct, reckless conduct, the capital assets of the defendant are a factor in assessing how much the punitive damages should be. So chances are Magna's got a lot more cash than Frank does, and that could be a material factor in setting the award of punitive damages if they are awarded. The other thing is that if there's a lawsuit against Magna, then Magna has an obligation to produce relevant documents relating to the case. And if the allegation is made in the case that there are other claimants who have made similar claims in the past, and Magna had done nothing about it, which I expect that allegation will be made, then Magna's got to produce all these documents relating to these prior cases. Frank may not have access to those documents. So there's an important procedural issue. And also, the motivation to settle on the part of Magna is going to be entirely different from Frank's position. Magna may well decide that, it's not in our interest to have continued litigation and have our name kicked around the newspapers and through the court system, and we'd rather settle the case. Now, Frank may not have the same view. Keep in mind, Frank's 92 years of age, and maybe he doesn't care that much about what the media is saying about him. So what I'm saying is that the motivation to resolve the case is going to be different from the view of Magna as opposed to Mr. Stronach personally. So then the issue arises, well, what about the liability of Magna? Is Magna responsible for the claim? And this issue shows the beauty of Ontario's new 2008 legislation allowing a civil action to be brought to enforce a human rights remedy. Again, the limitation period, as I mentioned in the last video, is much different in favor of this claim. And also, the liability of the employer under the human rights law, which again can be enforced by a civil proceeding, is much different than a civil claim. So in human rights law, the employer is responsible if it's shown the controlling mind of the corporation is the offender. And in the case of Mr. Stronach, he held Class B shares of Magna, which had 300 votes per share compared to 1 vote per share of a Class A shareholder. Effectively, he held 66% of the voting power of the corporation. I think there's an excellent case to be made out that Mr. Stronach was the controlling mind of Magna, and therefore Magna, under human rights law, will be responsible for the liability of Frank. Indeed, one complainant said recently in the newspaper as to why she didn't complain that, well, Frank was Magna. And indeed, Frank is and was Magna. Maybe not is. Frank's no longer associated with Magna. So there's a big, big difference under human rights law as opposed to a civil proceeding. In the civil proceeding itself, in a tort claim, that is for sexual assault, the word is assault and battery or intentional infliction of mental distress, is very unlikely that Magna would be responsible for the tort claims unless Magna had known of Mr. Stronach's predilections as alleged and did nothing about it. So it's akin to there being a negligence possibility against Magna. Negligence is a very difficult issue to show in employment law cases for a reason I'll describe later. So the end result of this is that because of the shape of Ontario's legislation, it's very possible Magna could be responsible for the civil claims against Frank, human rights claims against Frank, and it's an open field here. So I don't know, by the way, of any claims that have actually been started against Mr. Stronach because of this. This is all hypothetical, intended to illustrate the principle. Again, I know nothing of Mr. Stronach's guilt or innocence with respect to the criminal charges or these alleged human rights violations or civil proceedings. That's up to the courts to decide.